Mm.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a name everyone knows, but maybe not in the right way. The Great Library of Alexandria. We need to sort of peel back the layers on this one.
Yeah, the popular image is, well, it's comfortable, isn't it? This quiet, serene place full of scrolls. But honestly, that picture, it's almost entirely wrong. It misses the point.
Completely. If you're thinking dusty archive, like a museum for old books, you're missing the engine. Our sources, when you really dig into the Ptolemaic goals,
Yeah.
they paint a radically different picture.
Exactly. That word library, it's almost a deliberate misdirection, a historical sleight of hand. This thing wasn't a passive storage unit. It was an active, aggressive, state-funded engine.
An engine designed to do what exactly? Not just collect stuff, right?
Right. It was built to innovate, to centralize data on a massive scale, and ultimately to own the future. Forget dusty scrolls. Think. Think ancient Silicon Valley.
Okay, Silicon Valley, like a research lab.
More than that. Imagine a single entity combining the strategic research goals of something like DARPA, the pure science focus of an MIT, and the data hoarding power of Google, all rolled into one, funded by the state.
Wow. Okay, so preservation was like a side benefit, not the main goal.
Precisely. It was about discovery, yes, but proprietary discovery. Knowledge as a strategic asset.
So understanding that aggressive angle, that sort of competitive drive,
Yeah.
that sets the stage for why its destruction was such a catastrophe, right?
Absolutely. It wasn't just losing books, it was losing the world's R&D department.
And this whole massive project, it starts with Alexander the Great founding the city, Alexandria. But the idea for the library itself, the real insight that came later.
Yeah, Alexander had the vision for the city, but the genius behind the mountain, the library complex. That was his successor, one of his generals, Ptolemy I.
Ptolemy. And he wasn't just a book lover, I take it. Hardly. He was a hard-nosed general. He had seen the limits of just conquering territory with spears. He understood something fundamental. The next great empire wouldn't be built just on land, but on information. Information is power.
Exactly. He didn't just want to rule Egypt. His ambition was to rule the world's knowledge. That's the core strategic insight. He wasn't building a pretty monument. He was forging a weapon for intellectual and ultimately economic dominance.
Okay, ruling the world's knowledge in, what, the 3rd century BC? How on earth do you even attempt that?
Well, you start with what some sources call the Great Data Grab. And it wasn't polite requests for donations, let me tell you.
Data grab sounds ominous, like an intelligence operation.
Pretty much. It was state-sanctioned intellectual piracy, operating on a global scale. Ptolemy issued a royal decree, incredibly sweeping.
What did it say?
Basically, every single ship docking at Alexandria's port, which was huge, a major global hub had to be searched. Not for weapons or gold, primarily, for scrolls.
They were hunting for books.
Any written document, any scroll, yeah. And if they found one, it was immediately confiscated, not borrowed, taken. Appropriated by the state.
Wait, so the original owner just lost their text?
Well, they got something back. The state kept the original scroll, the original codex, the master copy, if you like, that went straight into the Mawson's collection.
And the owner?
The owner was handed back a quickly made copy, usually lower quality, but officially certified by the state. Imagine that today. Your ship docks, customs sees your laptop, copies everything, keeps the original drive, and hands you back a cheap printout saying certified copy.
That's audacious. It's systematic IP theft, basically.
It's on a global scale.
Yeah.
Designed explicitly to centralize all human learning in one place, under Ptolemaic control.
So less like a library, more like, an intelligence agency's R&D wing.
Yeah.
And the R&D happened in the Mawson.
Precisely. The library, the place with the scrolls, was just one part. The Mawson, the Temple of the Muses, that was the whole campus. The ecosystem, the engine room where the thinking, the translating, the arguing, the discovering happened.
It was a whole complex.
A huge interconnected campus designed to force interaction, force collaboration.
Okay, you've got the data grab, bringing in the raw material, but scrolls are useless without brains to read them, right?
Yeah.
And generate more.
Ptolemy knew that. So he launched maybe the most aggressive talent recruitment drive in ancient history. He went after the superstars, the best mathematicians, astronomers, physicians, poets, engineers from all over the known world.
How did he lure them? He offered them the deal of a lifetime. Basically, a genius grant for life. Think about this. A massive guaranteed salary forever, free luxury housing in the royal quarter, unlimited food, 0 taxes,
Wow.
and the clincher, fully funded research. Whatever they needed, materials, assistance, travel, the state paid for it. No grant applications, no budget worries. That's incredible. He was essentially creating a superbrain.
A centralized superbrain of geniuses, yeah. All living together, working together, constantly bumping into each other, sharing ideas, accessing the single massive database.
But there had to be a catch, right?
Yeah.
Nothing's that free.
There was one crucial string attached, and it reveals the whole game. Their minds, and crucially their discoveries, belonged exclusively to the Ptolemaic state.
So any breakthrough they made
Was proprietary government knowledge. They were, in effect, incredibly well-paid intellectual contractors, and the Ptolemies owned the intellectual property.
and the database they built,
Yeah.
the sheer volume must have been staggering.
Estimates suggest around 500,000 scrolls at its peak. And not just duplicates. We're talking the complete works of Greek philosophers, lost histories from Babylon, detailed Egyptian medical texts, astronomical charts.
Things we've completely lost now.
Absolutely devastating losses. Think about it. We only have, 7 plays by Sophocles? The library likely had all of them. And the legendary lost second book of Aristotle's Poetics, the one supposedly about comedy, probably there.
It's not just losing literature, it's losing operating manuals for civilization, technology, medicine.
Exactly. Losing that code meant humanity was denied countless potential pathways. It actively delayed progress, maybe by millennia.
Okay, so this amazing engine, this concentration of genius and data, before it was dismantled, what dangerous ideas did it actually produce? What discoveries were later deemed too hot to handle?
Well, they started by chipping away at the very foundations of how people saw reality. For centuries, the accepted story was comfortable, flat Earth, sky's a dome, humans are the center of everything.
The geocentric model. Everything revolves around us.
Right. But the scientists at the Mauschin weren't looking at the heavens for confirmation. They were looking for cold, hard data. And that data started telling a different story.
And the key figure here, the first domino, was Eratosthenes.
Eratosthenes, yeah. He wasn't just some dusty librarian. He was a polymath, mathematician, geographer, poet, astronomer. He was the chief librarian, yes, but think of him more like the CEO of the Mauschin. He was managing all this incoming data.
And he found something odd in the data pile.
An anomaly, yeah. A report came in from Syene, that's modern Aswan, way down south in Egypt. The report said that on the summer solstice, at noon precisely, a vertical stick, a gnomon, cast no shadow at all. The sun was directly overhead.
Okay. Unusual, maybe?
But Eratosthenes knew that up in Alexandria on the very same day, at the very same time, a vertical stick did cast a shadow, a noticeable one.
So same sun, same time, different shadows.
Exactly. If the Earth were flat and the sun's rays are parallel, which they assumed correctly, this shouldn't happen. Both sticks should behave the same way.
So the only explanation
Is that the surface of the Earth between Syene and Alexandria must be curved. The Earth is round.
Okay, that's the theory, but how did he measure it?
This is where the Mauschin's resources were critical. He needed the distance between the two cities accurately. He didn't guess. He commissioned professional
Surveyors back then.
highly trained specialists called bimetists. Their job was literally to walk distances, counting their steps, which were trained to be incredibly precise and equal. They walked the entire distance, about 5,000 stadia.
So he had the distance. What else?
He measured the angle of the shadow in Alexandria. He found it was 7.2 degrees. Now, 7.2 degrees is exactly 150th of a full circle, 360 degrees.
Okay, 150th.
So the calculation was almost elegant in its simplicity. If the distance between the two cities, 5,000 stadia, represents 150th of the Earth's curve, then the total circumference must be 50 times that distance.
5,000 times 50, 250,000 stadia.
Exactly. And when you convert that ancient measurement, stadia, into modern units, his calculation of the Earth's circumference comes out as 99% accurate.
99%. When was this again?
Roughly 240 BC, 2 centuries before Christ. Using just 2 sticks, a professional walker, and the Mauschin's data network.
That's absolutely mind-blowing.
Yeah.
But if they knew this with such accuracy, why did it get lost? Why were people like Columbus still arguing against flat earthers 1,700 years later?
Well, think about the implications. Knowing the Earth's size is the first step to accurate global maps, global navigation, unifying the planet under potentially anyone's control, not just Rome's.
So the knowledge itself was a threat to centralized power.
Potentially, yes. If you can accurately measure the Earth, you can accurately chart it, and maybe accurately predict things based on that knowledge. Rome, especially later, valued control and taxation of known territories, not encouraging exploration of a vast, potentially uncontrollable globe. The knowledge was inconvenient. It got sidelined, downplayed, eventually ignored by authorities who preferred a smaller, more manageable world.
Okay, so measuring the planet was suppressed. But they didn't stop there, did they? What was next?
Mapping the heavens. If the Earth isn't flat, maybe it's not the center of everything either. The official doctrine, remember, was the fixed Earth, heavy and important, with the sun, moon, and stars dutifully revolving around us.
Very reassuring for the human ego.
Very. But then came Aristarchus of Samos. He was looking at the complex planetary movements recorded in the Martians charts, the meticulous observations, probably from Babylonian sources too, and the math just didn't quite work with Earth stuck in the middle.
So he proposed?
He proposed the heliocentric model. The Earth is just another planet, and we revolve around the sun. He figured this out about 1,800 years before Copernicus supposedly discovered it.
1,800 years? That's staggering. Why wasn't that shouted from the rooftops?
Because it wasn't just an astronomical adjustment. It was, as you said, a philosophical atom bomb. If Earth isn't the center, if we're just whipping around the sun on a relatively small rock,
right,
then maybe humanity isn't the special focus of creation.
It implies a vast impersonal universe.
Exactly. Cold, maybe infinite, and utterly indifferent to human affairs. That kind of truth is poison to any authority, political or religious, that bases its legitimacy on a fixed cosmic order with humanity at the top. It's profoundly destabilizing.
So again, the knowledge was buried because it contradicted the preferred narrative.
It had to be. Authority couldn't tolerate a universe that didn't revolve around human importance. The math was there, the observations were there in the scrolls, but the philosophical implications were just too dangerous.
Okay, they cracked the macrocosm, the planet, the solar system. What about the microcosm, technology? You mentioned Hero earlier.
Right, Hero of Alexandria. And this is where the historical downplaying gets really obvious. Most standard histories dismiss him as a clever tinkerer, someone who made amusing toys.
That sounds like deliberate minimization.
Our sources argue it absolutely is. It's a convenient lie to mask the fact that Hero documented and built things that contained the fundamental code for technologies that could have utterly changed world history.
Like the steam engine, the elipile. Describe that again.
It's deceptively simple. A hollow metal ball, mounted so it could spin freely. 2 pipes connected to a cauldron of water below. You light a fire under the cauldron.
Okay, heating water, creating steam.
The steam travels up the pipes, fills the sphere, and then jets out through 2 small L-shaped nozzles on opposite sides of the sphere. The force of the escaping steam spins the ball.
So, converting heat into motion. It is a steam engine.
The fundamental principle, yes. Demonstrated, built, documented, 1st century AD. The absolute core concept of steam power was right there.
And he didn't stop there, did he? There were other inventions.
Yeah. Blueprints exist for the first known coin-operated vending machine. Put in a coin, it dispensed a set amount of holy water for temple use.
A vending machine.
He designed huge automatic temple doors. Priests would light a fire on an altar. Hidden pipes and counterweights would use the heat and expanding air or water to swing massive stone doors open. Pure theater, making the gods look powerful.
Incredible showmanship, but also sophisticated mechanics. And maybe the most startling, programmable automatons. Maybe the early robots. Figures on carts that could move along a preset path, perform actions like pouring wine, driven by falling weights, pulling ropes wrapped around complex systems of pegs and axles. You could program the sequence by how you wound the ropes. Steam power, vending machines, automatic systems, programmable robots. My God, the entire blueprint for the Industrial Revolution is sitting there in Alexandria, 1st century AD. That's the crux of it. The code was present. So the agonizing question becomes, why did nothing happen? Why the 1,600-year gap before the Industrial Revolution finally kicked off in Britain? It wasn't because the knowledge was lost, was it? Not yet. No. The analysis suggests a much more cynical answer. The technology wasn't wanted by the power structure that came to dominate Rome.
Specifically, the Roman Empire, which took over Egypt. Think about Rome's economy. It was built almost entirely on the backs of millions upon millions of slaves.
Okay, so labor-saving devices.
Are not just unnecessary, they're an active threat to that kind of system. Why would the ruling class, whose wealth and power depend on cheap, forced human labor, invest in machines that could replace that labor?
It would destabilize everything. The economy, social structure, the military.
Exactly. Hero's steam engine wasn't seen as progress. It was potentially revolutionary, yes, but in a way that threatened the very foundations of the empire. It was economically destabilizing and socially explosive.
So what did they do with it?
The knowledge was carefully documented. The blueprints were filed away in the library's archives. Too powerful, too dangerous to use. Safer to let it gather dust and keep the empire running on whips and chains.
Chilling. And we should also briefly mention the medical side again. Herophilus.
Yes, he wasn't just theorizing. He performed human dissections, which was incredibly rare and controversial. And through that, he correctly identified the brain, not the heart, as the command center, the seat of intelligence and consciousness, controlling the nervous system.
Foundation of neuroscience, basically.
Absolutely. But again, this knowledge directly challenged prevailing beliefs, particularly later religious dogma about the heart being the seat of the soul. So that anatomical truth was also eventually declared heresy, forbidden knowledge. So let's recap. By the time Rome is fully ascendant, say 1st century BC AD, Alexandria holds the keys to accurate global mapping, the true structure of the solar system, the power source for an industrial revolution, and the basics of how the human brain works. They're poised for a scientific explosion. Everything needed for a modern world was essentially there, in nascent form. And this is precisely the moment the Great Suppression, the long, slow intellectual rollback, begins in earnest. Okay, so the knowledge is there, but it's dangerous. How does the rollback start? Most people point to Julius Caesar, right? The famous story, Caesar burned the library down. That's the story everyone knows. And according to our sources, it's the first great successful lie. It's historical propaganda that's worked for over 2,000 years.
Propaganda. How so? Because it provides a neat, simple, almost accidental explanation. Oh, terrible tragedy. Fire got out of control during a battle. It stops people asking the much harder question, who were the real systematic killers of the library? So what actually happened in 48 BC with Caesar?
The historical reality is Caesar was besieged in Alexandria, trapped by the Egyptian fleet. In a desperate defensive move, he ordered his own ships in the harbor to be set on fire to create a fire break to stop the Egyptians from using them against him.
Okay, a tactical move. But the fire spread.
It did spread wildly across the docks. Now, the docks were crammed with warehouses full of grain, timber, and yes, scrolls. Huge numbers of scrolls. Tens of thousands, maybe more.
So scrolls were burned.
Absolutely. A devastating loss. But what scrolls? Mostly inventory copies for export, textbooks used for basic teaching, scrolls in storage waiting to be cataloged or shipped out. It was like burning down Amazon's warehouses, not the main R&D server room.
Because the main library, the Mausoleum itself,
was in a completely different part of the city, the Bruchon, the heavily fortified royal quarter, far from the docks. Archaeological and historical evidence confirms the fire couldn't have reached it. The Mausoleum complex continued operating, damaged perhaps, but functioning, for centuries after Caesar.
So the Caesar burned it story is an alibi.
Essentially, yes, a convenient historical alibi. It allowed Rome, which slowly strangled the institution over the next 300 years, to blame the eventual death on a single famous general's wartime accident, rather than their own long-term policy of deliberate neglect and suppression.
So the real death wasn't a sudden fire, but a slow poisoning.
Exactly. A slow, deliberate poisoning over centuries. Caesar's fire provided the cover story. The Roman takeover of Egypt was the start of the actual process.
When did Rome take full control?
Around 30 BC, after Cleopatra and Antony, Egypt becomes a Roman province, and critically, it becomes the personal property of the emperor, basically Rome's breadbasket.
And the new management had different priorities.
Radically different. The Ptolemies, for all their flaws, valued knowledge as a strategic asset. Rome valued stability, obedience, and efficient resource extraction. They were brilliant engineers of control roads, aqueducts, tax systems. They didn't care about measuring the earth. They cared about taxing its harvest.
Controllable knowledge, yes. Destabilizing knowledge, no.
Precisely. So what happens to the Mausoleum, this incredibly expensive cutting-edge research facility? It gets absorbed into the massive Roman bureaucracy. And what's the first thing to go in any bureaucratic takeover?
The R&D budget.
Always. The genius grants stopped, the huge salaries were slashed, the aggressive data grab ceased entirely. Why spend money acquiring new, potentially troublesome knowledge?
And the existing scholars?
Ones doing expensive long-term research astronomy, deep mathematics, anatomy, they started leaving. Funding dried up, the environment became less intellectually stimulating, more restrictive. The brightest minds drifted away, maybe to Rome itself or eastward.
So the institution was being starved.
Systematically starved of talent, funding, and purpose. That vibrant, buzzing Silicon Valley slowly, deliberately decayed over generations. The labs closed, the workshops grew quiet, It transformed into a respectable but sleepy museum.
A place for safe scholars.
Exactly. Grammarians, state-approved philosophers rehashing old ideas, people whose work wouldn't rock the boat, wouldn't challenge Roman authority or economic structures.
There's a chilling strategy there. You don't need to dramatically destroy something if you can just make it irrelevant first.
It's the classic playbook for dismantling a powerful idea or institution. Make it seem old-fashioned, useless, a drain on resources. Make it sick. Then when the final blow comes, nobody really cares enough to defend it. It looks like a mercy-telling.
And driving this slow decay were two major forces of fear, right? The fear of the empire and the fear of rising religious dogma.
Yes, intertwined but distinct fears. Rome, the empire, feared material disruption, economic chaos, social unrest. We talked about the steam engine threatening slavery. That's the kind of destabilizing knowledge they actively suppressed. They wanted aqueduct engineers, not potential revolutionaries.
And the other fear, from the rising power of Christianity.
That was a deeper philosophical fear. The core methodology of the Mautian, finding truth through observation, measurement, and critical questioning, was fundamentally incompatible with a system based on absolute truth revealed through divine scripture.
How so?
Well, think it through. If you can measure the earth, what stops you trying to measure heaven? If science proves the brain, a physical organ, is the seat of thought, what does that do to the concept of an immaterial soul?
And if Aristarchus is right, and Earth isn't the center,
then humanity's special place in creation is challenged. The Mautian offered veritas, truth derived from evidence, which is always provisional, always open to new data. Dogma offered veritas derived from revelation, which is absolute, eternal, and cannot be questioned.
two fundamentally rival systems for understanding reality.
And the first rule of power, any power, is you must eliminate rival sources of authority, rival claims to truth. The Mautian, even in its weakened state, represented that rival. It had to go, not just for the specific dangerous facts it held, but for the dangerous method it taught.
So the slow poisoning made it irrelevant. When did the actual physical destruction happen, the final blows?
The first major physical destruction, the end of the original Mautian campus, came in 272 AD. This is during the chaos of the Roman Empire's 3rd century crisis.
What was happening in Alexandria then?
Alexandria, always a bit rebellious, had sided with the breakaway Palmyrene Empire against Rome. The Roman Emperor Aurelian, a tough, no-nonsense general, marched in to retake the city.
And the fighting centered on. The rebels fortified the oldest, strongest part of the city, the Bruttian district, the royal quarter, which unfortunately was where the original, now rather neglected Mautian building still stood. So the library complex became a military objective.
Exactly. And here's where the previous centuries of Roman neglect paid off for the destroyers. 200 years earlier, maybe even 100, a Roman general might have hesitated, tried to preserve the ancient sacred site of learning. But to Aurelian's battle-hardened legionaries, in 272 AD,
Just another building.
just a fortified enemy position, no more sacred, as one source puts it, than a grain silo. It held no value for them beyond its tactical position.
And the battle.
It was fierce urban warfare, street-by-street fighting. To crush the rebellion completely, Aurelian's forces essentially had to level the entire Bruttian district, systematically destroyed it.
So the original Mautian campus was wiped out then?
Utterly, so thoroughly destroyed it was never rebuilt. That marks the physical death of the main original library and research center. The main server was gone.
But knowledge is hard to kill completely. Was there a backup? There was. Like any good system, there was redundancy. Over the centuries, a significant collection of scrolls, and crucially, the ongoing tradition of philosophy and learning, had migrated to a daughter library located within another major Alexandrian complex. The Serapeum. The Serapeum. A temple.
A magnificent temple complex dedicated to the god Serapis, yes. But it also housed a major library and lecture halls. By the late 4th century, it was really the last significant bastion of classical learning in the city. Greek philosophy, science, Egyptian traditions, all coexisting. The backup files, if you like.
So the knowledge survived the military destruction. What came next?
The next attack wasn't military, it was ideological. This time, the enemy wasn't the Roman state, but the newly empowered, militant, institutionalized Christian church.
Led by.
The Patriarch of Alexandria, a man named Theophilus. Extremely zealous, viewed paganism and philosophy as abominations that needed to be eradicated. To him, the Serapeum, with its pagan scrolls and statues of philosophers, was a fortress of darkness.
And he had the power to act.
He got his chance in 391 AD. The The Roman Emperor Theodosius, now Christian, issued an empire-wide decree ordering the closure or destruction of all pagan temples. This was the green light Theophilus needed.
So he used Roman soldiers.
No, much more effective for his purposes, he unleashed a mob, primarily monks, his fanatical followers, zealots whipped into a frenzy. This wasn't just rioting, it was a state-sanctioned religious cleansing.
They attacked the Serapeum.
Stormed it, overwhelmed any defenders. According to accounts, they went on a rampage, smashing priceless statues of Greek philosophers like Plato, Aristotle, and then the scrolls. The backup library.
They burned them.
Set them ablaze, hundreds of thousands of irreplaceable texts, the intellectual heritage of centuries gone up in smoke. The Serapeum itself was then completely dismantled, leveled to the ground. A church was eventually built on the ruins.
That feels like the final nail in the coffin. The ideological murder, as you called it.
It was the deliberate destruction of the knowledge itself, targeting the very soul of the institution. But there was one final step needed to ensure the old ways never returned.
What was that?
You have to eliminate the teachers, you have to destroy the living carriers of the dangerous method, you have to delete the programmers, and that leads us to the tragic, symbolic story of Hypatia.
Hypatia, the famous female philosopher and mathematician.
Yes. She was, in many ways, the last living ember of the original Mausan spirit in Alexandria. Highly respected, brilliant, teaching mathematics, astronomy, and Neoplatonic philosophy. Crucially, she taught critical thinking, the Socratic method, in a city increasingly dominated by absolute dogma.
And she taught everyone.
Her classroom was open to all Christians, Jews, pagans. She represented intellectual tolerance and reason in an age of rising fanaticism. But this made her dangerous to the new power structure.
Specifically to Patriarch Cyril, Theophilus' nephew.
Exactly. Cyril had succeeded his uncle and was arguably even more ruthless in consolidating power. Hypatia posed a threat for two reasons. First, her sheer intellectual prestige offered an alternative source of authority. Second, she was politically influential. She was a respected advisor to Orestes, the Roman governor of Alexandria.
So, reason had the ear of political power. Cyril couldn't have that. No. He saw her as a direct rival for influence over the governor in the city. Since he couldn't defeat her in philosophical debates, she was famously brilliant. He resorted to the classic tool of tyrants: slander and incitement. What did they accuse her of?
His agents spread rumors. They branded her a witch. They claimed she practiced dark magic, that she used sorcery to somehow bewitch the governor Orestes, turning him against the church. It was a targeted smear campaign designed to turn the public against her.
Making the independent, rational woman into a public enemy.
Precisely. And the campaign worked. In Lent of 415 AD, the situation exploded. Cyril's private militia, a mob of monks known as the Parabolani, technically lay helpers, but basically his enforcers decided to act.
They attacked her.
They ambushed her chariot as she rode through the city. They didn't arrest her, didn't take her to the governor. They dragged her from her chariot.
Where did they take her?
To a nearby church, the Serapeum. And there, inside the church, this mob, incited by Cyril's rhetoric, murdered her. The accounts are gruesome. They stripped her naked and then used a straw of broken pieces of pottery or sharp oyster shells to scrape the flesh from her bones while she was still alive. Then they dismembered her body and burned the remains.
Oh my God, that's beyond brutal. It's ritualistic. It was astutely intended as a symbolic public execution. The message was terrifyingly clear. This is what happens to pagan philosophy. This is what happens to independent reason when it challenges the authority of the church. This is the state of women who dare to teach and hold influence. The lights of Alexandria finally went out.
Completely. With Hypatia's murder, the last remnants of the Alexandrian intellectual tradition were silenced by terror. The systematic destruction was complete. The Dark Ages weren't just coming, they had arrived, enforced by violence. #V, the stolen future and the ghost in exile.
So the silence that fell over Europe wasn't just a gradual decline. It was, as you say, an active push into ignorance, orchestrated by powers that benefited from that ignorance.
That's what the analysis strongly suggests. The Dark Ages weren't just a passive slump. They were, in part, a consequence of the deliberate destruction of the knowledge infrastructure and the terrorizing of its practitioners.
Okay, let's try to quantify the cost. You talked about a stolen future. What does that actually mean in terms of lost time? Can we run a sort of simulation?
We can try. Let's look at 3 key lost files and the delay their suppression caused. File 1. Aristarchus' heliocentric model, right, developed around 250 BC and rediscovered by Copernicus when?
Copernicus published, very cautiously, in 1543 AD. That's a delay of nearly 1,800 years. 18 centuries where astronomy and physics were largely stalled or went down wrong paths because the correct model was actively suppressed. Think of the lost science.
Okay, 1,800 years for that one. What's Lost File 2?
Herophilus is scientific medicine and anatomy. Around 300 BC, he's identifying the brain's function. Then that knowledge is declared heresy. What replaced it?
Things like balancing the four humors, bloodletting. Exactly. Superstition and guesswork replaced empirical observation for roughly 1,500 years, until Vesalius and others began challenging dogma again during the Renaissance. How many millions, maybe billions, died from infections, plagues, bad surgery because that basic anatomical code was deleted? The human cost is incalculable.
1,500 years of medical darkness. And Lost File 3.
Hero's steam engine, 1st century AD. This is the potential game changer, the code that could have arguably prevented the Dark Ages altogether.
How so? Run their alternate timeline.
Okay, imagine if the Machine hadn't been starved by Rome. Imagine if Hero's work, instead of being filed away, had received continued state funding and development for just another couple of centuries.
What might have happened by, say, 100 AD?
You could realistically have seen the start of an industrial revolution. Maybe first used for mining pumps, irrigation, maybe simple transport. This leads to better materials, better tools.
Which leads to better science.
Better metal means better scientific instruments. Better telescopes could have definitively proven Aristarchus right 1,500 years early. Better lenses might have led to microscopes and the discovery of germ theory 1,600 years sooner. The positive feedback loop ignites.
And by the time Theophilus and Cyril arrive on the scene, around 400 AD.
Society might have looked completely different. A world increasingly running on scientific principles with demonstrable benefits in health, production, maybe even warfare. That kind of world is much harder for dogma to dominate. You can't easily burn libraries or murder scientists when the whole system depends on their output.
So the Dark Ages might have been bypassed?
It's plausible. If the scientific and industrial momentum had continued, the forces that enforced the Dark Ages might never have gained such total control. Now, let's extrapolate further.
Owen.
The modern scientific revolution, let's say it properly kicks off with Copernicus around 1543. It took roughly 400 years from Copernicus to Neil Armstrong landing on the moon in 1969.
Okay, a 400-year acceleration curve.
Now, what if that 400-year clock had started not in the 1500s, but around, say, 100 AD, building on Hero and Aristarchus? Add 400 years. By 500 AD, we could have been at a level analogous to our mid-20th century.
So by today...
You wouldn't be arguing about maybe colonizing Mars. We'd potentially be an interstellar species. That's the mind-bending scale of the delay. They didn't just burn some scrolls. They arguably cost us the stars. That's the stolen future.
That's a heavy thought. But you said knowledge is like a virus, hard to kill. Did any of it escape the destruction in Alexandria?
Yes. Thankfully. Some scholars at the Machine, seeing the writing on the wall, the Roman bureaucracy, the rising fanaticism, the budget cuts, they acted preemptively. They started making backups. Quietly copying the most important, perhaps the most dangerous scrolls. The core mathematics, Aristarchus's heliocentric proofs, Hero's engineering blueprints, Herophilus's anatomical charts. They smuggled these vital files out.
Where did they take them?
They fled the increasingly intolerant West and headed east. Primarily to Persia and Syria, with intellectual pursuits were still valued, or at least tolerated.
So the knowledge went into exile.
Into exile, yes. And it lay relatively dormant for several centuries, but crucially, it was preserved. Often by communities like the Nestorian Christians, who had also fled persecution, and within the great libraries of the Sasanian Persian Empire. The code was safe, waiting for a new system, a new server to run it.
And that new server arrived with Islam.
Yes, spectacularly in the 8th and 9th centuries with the rise of the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. Caliphs like Harun al-Rashid, famous from the Arabian Nights, and especially his son al-Mamun, were deeply interested in knowledge. They understood, like the early Ptolemies, that knowledge was power.
So they went looking for these lost texts.
Aggressively. They launched a massive, state-funded translation movement. They sent agents out across the empire and beyond, hunting for Greek, Persian, Indian texts. They paid fortunes for scrolls, famously sometimes paying translators the scroll's weight in gold.
A complete reversal of the Western book burning.
Total reversal. And in Baghdad, they established the Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom.
Alexandria 2.0.
Absolutely. The direct spiritual and intellectual successor to the Machine. And the results were immediate and revolutionary. They didn't just collect and translate. They studied, critiqued, built upon the knowledge. They ignited the code.
What kind of results?
They translated heroes' works, which directly inspired incredible engineers like Al-Jazari in the 12th century, who built sophisticated water clocks, fountains, automata, early robots far beyond anything in Europe at the time.
And the medical texts.
Herophilus and Galen were translated, leading to giants like Al-Razi, who emphasized clinical observation, and Ibn Sina, Avicenna, whose Canon of Medicine, a massive encyclopedia summarizing and adding to Greek and Islamic medical knowledge, became the standard medical textbook in both the Islamic world and Europe for over 600 years.
Wow. And astronomy.
They translated Ptolemy's Almagest, but also, crucially, preserved and expanded upon the astronomical data tables. They developed algebra, refined trigonometry, essential tools needed for better calculations. Their observatories produced star charts far more accurate than anything available in the West. These were the maps that eventually guided European explorers.
So the Islamic Golden Age wasn't just spontaneous. It was fueled directly by rediscovering and reigniting the lost Alexandrian knowledge.
It was a direct consequence. The exiled mind of Alexandria found a new, vibrant home, and the result was centuries of brilliant innovation, while Europe was, for the most part, still struggling in the dark.
Okay, so Europe, or specifically the powers dominating it like the Church in Rome, had successfully erased this knowledge from their own domain, only to see it flourish and empower their main geopolitical and religious rival, the Islamic Caliphates.
Exactly. It created a massive strategic problem. By the High Middle Ages, say the 11th, 12th centuries, it was becoming undeniable that the Islamic world was scientifically and technologically superior in many areas, precisely because they possessed the knowledge that the West had destroyed or suppressed.
That must have been awkward. Awkward and dangerous. So a new phase began. Not destruction this time, but a strategic reversal. Reacquisition. The West realized it needed that lost code back, even if it was still considered theologically problematic. How did they get it back?
Two main ways. The first, and more violent, was through the Crusades. While the public narrative was about reclaiming the Holy Land, the Crusades also functioned as a massive, if unintentional, technology transfer and espionage operation.
How so? Western knights and scholars traveling to the Middle East encountered things they hadn't seen in centuries or ever. Sophisticated castles built with advanced engineering, hospitals using rational medical practices based on Ibn Sina, libraries filled with texts, advanced navigation techniques, superior metalwork. They saw the results of the lost code in action.
Right. They experienced firsthand the practical advantages derived from Arabic science, which was itself built on the Greek foundations from Alexandria. They brought back not just plunder, but ideas, techniques, and crucially, translated texts. Arabic versions of Aristotle, Euclid, Galen started trickling back west.
Okay, so reacquisition by the sword. What was the other method? More peaceful and arguably more systematic by the pen. They centered on places where Christian Europe bordered the Islamic world, particularly in Al-Andalus, Islamic Spain. After cities like Toledo were reconquered by Christian kingdoms in the 11th and 12th centuries, they found vast libraries full of Arabic texts, containing the Greek knowledge.
Exactly. Arabic translations of Plato, Aristotle, Ptolemy, Euclid, the medical writers, everything. So centers of translation were established, most famously in Toledo. Here, Christian, Jewish, and sometimes Muslim scholars worked side by side.
Translating from Arabic back into Latin?
Precisely. Translating the exiled mind of Alexandria, which had found refuge in Arabic, back into the language of the European intellectual elite. It was a monumental undertaking, recovering centuries of lost thought.
So the knowledge is coming back. But this creates that paradox you mentioned for the church authorities in Rome.
A huge paradox. On the one hand, this knowledge is clearly powerful, useful, even essential for competing militarily and economically. You need Aristotle's logic for theology, you need Galen's medicine, even if flawed, for doctors, you need Euclid's geometry for building cathedrals.
But on the other hand,
it's still fundamentally pagan philosophy. It's still Aristarchus implicitly challenging Genesis, still Herophilus challenging the soul, still rationalism potentially undermining faith. It's the same knowledge they'd spent centuries suppressing and condemning as heresy.
So what do you do with knowledge that's both essential and forbidden? You can't destroy it anymore. It's too useful and it's spreading. You can't fully embrace it. It's too dangerous theologically. So you do the next best thing. You control it. You classify it. Classify it how?
This is where institutions like the Archivum Apostolicum Secretum, the Vatican's secret archives, become critically important. Remember, secretum here originally meant private or personal to the Pope, not necessarily secretive in the modern sense, but implying restricted access.
So they collected these newly translated, potentially dangerous texts.
Absolutely. The spoils from the Crusades, the sensitive translations coming out of Toledo, they flowed towards Rome, the center of Western authority. The Vatican archives became, in effect, the secure repository for this reacquired problematic knowledge. We're talking vast collections. Estimates mention 85 kilometers of shelving today.
What might be in there from that era?
Well, this is where speculation meets historical logic. Did they lock away the most direct translations of Aristarchus that hinted too strongly at heliocentrism? Did they classify detailed commentaries on Aristotle that contradicted church doctrine? Did copies of Hero's more advanced, destabilizing blueprints end up filed away? It's plausible.
So the strategy shifted from delete to contain and control.
Precisely. The authority realized it couldn't kill the mind of the world, so it decided to effectively nationalize it. Lock up the most dangerous files, control the narrative, release information only slowly, carefully, when deemed safe or necessary for the church's own purposes. Knowledge became privatized by the central authority.
And this controlled, gradual release of rediscovered knowledge, is that what we call the Renaissance?
That's the argument. The traditional narrative of the Renaissance is this spontaneous rebirth of genius after the Dark Ages. A magical awakening.
But maybe not so spontaneous.
Maybe not. Maybe it's better understood as a reignition or a great re-remembering, fueled by the exiled Alexandrian code finally leaking out past the controls.
Leaking out.
Through those translations from Spain finally circulating more widely. Through scholars returning from the East, especially after Constantinople fell to the Turks in 1453, bringing original Greek manuscripts directly to Italy. Through merchants and crusaders bringing back ideas and techniques. The classified files started to escape the archive.
Can we see direct evidence of this remembering in Renaissance figures?
Absolutely. Look at Brunelleschi building the impossible dome on Florence Cathedral in the early 15th century. He used innovative engineering techniques, drawing heavily on his study of ancient Roman structures, yes, but also likely accessing principles of geometry and mechanics preserved in those rediscovered Greek texts, possibly via Arabic sources.
And Copernicus.
Copernicus himself, in early drafts of his work, explicitly mentioned Aristarchus of Samos as an ancient precedent for the heliocentric idea. He knew he wasn't inventing it from scratch. He was reviving and mathematically proving an ancient, suppressed truth he'd found referenced in the rediscovered classics.
Okay, and the ultimate Renaissance man, Leonardo da Vinci.
Think about Leonardo. Was he a superhuman genius appearing out of nowhere, or was he perhaps the first person in maybe 1,000 years to gain access, whether through official channels or finding leaked copies, to a significant chunk of those classified files?
As anatomical drawings.
Are astoundingly accurate. They show knowledge of musculature, the nervous system, the heart, echoing the kind of dissections Herophilus did, knowledge largely forbidden and lost in Europe for centuries. Where did he get that anatomical insight, if not from rediscovered, perhaps previously restricted texts?
And his engineering sketches. Flying machines, war machines.
Many show principles remarkably similar to the complex machines described by engineers like Al-Jazari in the Islamic Golden Age, who himself was working from translations of Hero of Alexandria. Da Vinci wasn't just inventing cold, he was likely accessing and brilliantly synthesizing rediscovered blueprints. He had the user manual again.
So the Renaissance wasn't a miracle. It was the slow, difficult rebooting of the Alexandrian operating system after 1,500 years of deliberate downtime and controlled access.
That's a powerful way to put it. A triumph, yes, but a tragically delayed one. But this created a new problem for the authorities who had managed the suppression and classification for so long.
What problem?
The knowledge was getting out. What happens when you can't control the leaks anymore?
And the thing that finally blew the doors off the classified archive, the thing that broke the control mechanism, was
the printing press, mid-15th century. Suddenly, knowledge wasn't confined to expensive hand-copied manuscripts controlled by monasteries or archives. Ideas could be replicated cheaply, quickly, and distributed widely.
the ultimate decentralization technology for its time.
Absolutely. The firewall failed. You couldn't burn all the copies anymore. The mind of the world, the Alexandrian code, went viral.
And that leads directly to
The scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, Copernicus gets printed, Vesalius's anatomy gets printed, Newton gets printed. The core truths that had been discovered, suppressed, exiled, reacquired, and classified were finally released into the public domain on an unstoppable scale.
the steam engine gets rebuilt for real this time. Medicine advances. We finally start building on Aristarchus and head towards the stars. Humanity reclaimed the stolen future.
It seems like victory, right? The final triumph of knowledge over suppression. And we've now built what seems like the ultimate, unkillable, decentralized Library of Alexandria.
The internet.
The internet. Mind of the World 5.0. Every scroll, every blueprint, every theory, digitized, searchable, instantly available to almost anyone on the planet. Total democratization of information, right? We won! The old authorities lost! A historical reversal like Alexandria is impossible now.
But there's a but coming, isn't there?
There's a huge but. And according to the analysis, believing we've achieved permanent victory is the final, most dangerous deception. We were so focused on building the ultimate library, we forgot to ask the crucial Alexandrian question.
Who controls the building?
Exactly. Who owns the servers? Who writes the code that filters the information? The 21st century version of authority is far, far smarter and more subtle than Emperor Theodosius or Patriarch Cyril.
How so?
It understands you can't easily burn the library anymore, so it doesn't try to burn it. It owns it.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to ban scrolls outright. It just needs to control the search results.
The algorithm.
The algorithm. The new authority isn't a person in robes or armor. It's a terms of service agreement. It's a community guideline. It's lines of code written in Silicon Valley or perhaps by state actors influencing those platforms.
So the reset, the suppression, is happening again, but silently.
Silently, algorithmically. The new censorship isn't book burning, it's shadow banning. It's deranking. It's tweaking the recommendation engine.
So the dangerous idea isn't deleted.
No, that causes outcry. It's just buried. Pushed down to page 50 of the search results where statistically almost no one will ever see it. It's the digital equivalent of locking a scroll away in the deepest vault of the Vatican archives. Access is theoretically possible, but practically impossible for the average user.
And the language changes too. Heresy becomes
misinformation or disinformation or malinformation, terms that sound objective scientific but are often applied to ideas that simply challenge the prevailing narrative or the interests of the platform owner or the state.
And dogma becomes
The consensus, or settled science, even when the science is far from settled. Enforced not by threats of excommunication, but by algorithmic downweighting and warnings from fact-checkers who often have their own biases or funding sources.
And what about the modern Hypatias, the people promoting challenging ideas?
The execution is digital now. You don't need a mob with oyster shells. You deplatform them. You demonetize their content, cutting off their income. You use coordinated campaigns to brand them as cranks or dangerous extremists. You make them professionally toxic.
So their funding dries up, their audience shrinks, they become irrelevant.
It's the slow poisoning strategy used by the Romans against the mouse sand, updated for the digital age. Starve the dissenters, make them seem marginal, irrelevant, untrustworthy, ensure their ideas never reach critical mass. The playbook is disturbingly similar.
So the takeaway is that this amazing digital library we've built is potentially just as vulnerable to control and manipulation as the physical one was. Perhaps even more so because the control is less visible, more insidious. It's the same fundamental conflict. An authority, whether corporate or governmental, or both, fundamentally terrified of uncontrollable knowledge that might challenge its power, its narrative, or its profits. The lesson of Alexandria isn't history then.
It's a live warning. The Great Reset isn't something that happened centuries ago. An algorithmic version of it might be happening right now, quietly, behind the clean interface of your search engine or social media feed. #8. Outro.
So we've traced this incredible arc, the birth of this revolutionary engine of knowledge, its deliberate strangulation and murder, its unlikely exile and preservation in the East, and its slow, contested rebirth powering the Renaissance and ultimately our modern world.
Yeah, the core insight seems to be that knowledge itself is incredibly resilient, almost like a virus. You can't truly destroy it. You can only suppress it, drive it underground, force it to migrate. But eventually, it finds a new host, a new server, and comes back online. Baghdad proved that. The printing press proved that.
But the control mechanisms adapt. The threat evolves. After the library was physically destroyed, the knowledge was controlled through classification and archives. After the printing press decentralized it, the control shifted to owning the platforms and managing the algorithms that filter access.
Exactly. We reclaimed a stolen future, built this incredible digital Mautian, giving us access to virtually all human knowledge. But perhaps, in our techno-optimism, we handed the keys to the front door, the search bar, over to a new generation of gatekeepers.
So you, listening right now, you have more information instantly available than Eratosthenes or Hypatia could have dreamed of. All the scrolls, all the science, all the history, theoretically just a click away.
But the fundamental question hasn't changed since 415 AD on the streets of Alexandria, as Cyril's mob hunted for Hypatia. It's the same question we face today, every time we open a browser or scroll through a feed. And that question, the final provocation we want to leave you with, is this. Who controls the algorithm? Who decides what information rises to the top? Who gets to define what is relevant, what is safe, and ultimately, what is veritas? Because if we don't remain vigilant about who owns and shapes our access to information, we risk letting the new digital librarians quietly curate us into a new kind of dark age, all while believing we're more enlightened than ever.